What's up, y'all? How you guys doing this Sunday night or Sunday afternoon, depending what time it is in the world you're viewing from? It's your boy Dion Reacts. Uh, those who are mostly familiar with me, I do reaction channels. I react to other content, or I may do skits. Come join the family. You know what I'm saying? But I wanted to do a video because I've been observing some interesting things that I could personally sympathize and empathize with. Specifically around Mr. Stephen A. Smith. The things that he's been subjected to these past few days, or if not weeks, I've similarly have gone through at least 4 or 5 years ago. So I definitely want to get into that a little bit. But I want to say why my respect for Stephen A. Smith continues to increase as time goes on. I've always been somewhat of a fan of him because even though he's arguably the most important entity at ESPN, he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said a great quote where he said that anybody could be a Stephen A. Everybody can't be a LeBron James. Everybody can't be a Josh Allen or a Michael Jordan. But anybody could be a Stephen A. Smith if they put forth the effort. Since him saying that, I've always had an appreciation and respect for Stephen A. I always have an appreciation and respect for his willingness to contribute back to many communities, the Black community included, which is very essential too, because a part of me used to be nervous that Mr. Smith was so corporate that he couldn't be for the people. And I used to believe that if you are a Black man or woman and you reach a certain level of corporatism, the powers that be weren't going to let you be sensitive to the plight of your fellow Black Americans. But Smith showed that you could be. Not only on his platform on ESPN and his personal platform, but on his visitations to other platforms. So for that, I commend Mr. Smith again. Oh, and I can only envision one day of possibly interacting with Mr. Smith personally. Because more and more I start to realize that we are very similar type of thinking brothers. All right, so let me get into the most recent underlyings that has caused my respect for Mr. Smith to go up even more. His venture into the political world. Now, he stated on several occasions that he's always crossed sports and politics. However, in lieu of him acquiring his own platform under the same name, it's been more frequent. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, including Mr. Smith, but I believe up until this year, or up until recent years, he's voted Democrat. I too used to be a Democrat. Now, at this time frame, I would consider myself a Dino or a Dino, because, which for those you don't know is Democrat in name only, because the only reason I was a Democrat is because, in the community in which I was raised in, it was the most pro-Black party to be with. Well, that's not really the case. There's quite a few things I can highlight that would reiterate that the Democratic Party isn't the most pro-Black party. And some might say the Republican Party isn't either. Which is why I, too, am someone who is in the middle. Although about 4 or 5 years ago, I was right-leaning. I would have considered myself a right-leaning conservative. However, upon further studying and further being amongst fellow conservatives, I realized not all of my thought processes were in alignment with a pure conservative perspective. And then I realized most of my conservatism was in alignment with the fiscal aspect of this U.S. government. And also the spiritual and religious aspect that's typically associated with being conservative, which many assume to be Christian. And that's not to say that liberals and leftists can't be Christian either. But I'm saying the typical conservative view of Christianity, I was typically in alignment with that. However, as of about almost 2 years ago, when I was much more potently popular on TikTok and hosting lives and having discussions with both sides, I've come to amend my perspective to where I'm at now, middle. With that being said, even though I was conservative, I was still independent back then. I was an independent conservative. So essentially, I was a right-leaning centrist or right-leaning moderate, you could say. Although I'm still somewhat right-leaning now, I'm more so towards the middle, because you could say that I'm a bit left in other aspects or other facets of the American policies. Now, to drive it back home to why I respect Smith even more now than I've did before, is his willingness to hear both sides on his platform. So he himself has claimed to be a centrist. Now, I believe he stated he leans left still, but he's centrist, and he's willing to listen to both the left and the right, not just exclusively one. And I must join him in also expressing disappointment in networks like MSNBC and attacking him for being neutral. Because yet this is also yet another reflection of a party becoming so unequivocally on one side that even a neutrality position, a position of neutrality, is almost automatically deemed as being in alignment with the right. Which is not right. No pun intended. Okay, maybe a little. So I gotta give some flowers to Mrs. Smith as well for being that objective-minded to listen to both sides of the political fences. That's important. And if only the left was also willing to do that, things would be better. And the fact that this has been an issue for many decades, in my opinion, indicates to me that there isn't a collective desire of common ground to be sought. You have Democrats back then, who were Democrats back then, who are no longer Democrat, who are either Republican or independent, because they too have demonstrated some sort of objectivity, and that objectivity got them ostracized from their own party. Like who? Tulsi Gabbard. Now, even when I was much more conservative leaning back then, I was a fan of Tulsi Gabbard. I liked what she said. She seemed like a woman of integrity. And I had a feeling that because she was an objective Democratic-minded person and not in alignment with the unequivocal left extremisms of their policies, she was due to being ostracized. I saw it coming. And sure enough, she was placed in a position where she had to flirt with being an independent, and she became an independent. And I'm glad she's able to express her thoughts now without being subjected to exclusion. Also another individual I like to have the pleasure of speaking with and interacting with as well. And this is not to exclude the right either. We have extreme right ideals as well, where there's no grace or forgiveness for anything that isn't conservative or right-leaning. Now, albeit, I would argue some of that may be in defense to the left's unwillingness to find common ground, but nonetheless, the lack of common ground is quite poignant, in my opinion. It's sad, because we could be much more in unison than we are now. Now, with that being said, I like to come down from that much more serious topic and go a little bit into sports. An interesting finals I would like to see is the Lakers and the Cavs. I think that would be a great finals. What greater story headline would there be with LeBron facing his old team close to the city that he grew up in, Akron, Ohio? Lakers and Cavs, that would be great. The only other matchup I could think better than that is the classic Celtics and Lakers matchup. But that would be a story. Could you imagine if it was proven and everybody collectively acknowledged that the NBA was scripted or rigged? What much more beautiful story would there be if LeBron was to get a 5th ring defeating the Cavaliers, his old team, and then subsequently the next year defeating the Boston Celtics for a 6th ring? Oh, Shannon Sharpe would have a fit. I can just picture him right now. Lakers 5, KFC, UFC, OKC, Lakers 5. I just picture him right now with that slogan. But yeah, I think that would be a great matchup. Luka and LeBron are meshing very well. Luka's still averaging the amount of points that he was in Dallas. LeBron's still doing what he's doing at the age of 40 is amazing. In fact, I think Stephen A. or another commentator had a comparison between the numbers he was putting up with the Heat and the numbers he's averaging now at 40 years old. It's definitely a spectacle to be had. Now, speaking of Stephen A. and LeBron, I need to go to that instance where LeBron went up and confronted Stephen A. at the game during a timeout in the 3rd quarter, I believe. After listening to Stephen A.'s sessions of rebutting LeBron and LeBron's interview with Pat McAfee, I almost switched my position of agreeing with Stephen A. to having a neutral position, in which LeBron was saying that, in a roundabout way, I don't feel like he unequivocally said this, but he was saying that his point was to defend his household and Stephen A. not questioning him as a father. And based on other interviews that I've listened to, that also seems to be the consensus, in which James was angry and provoked to speak with Stephen A. But the only thing I have to say is why I maintain my position of agreeing with Stephen A. is due to the fact, to Stephen A.'s point, LeBron himself has stated that if a team wanted his presence, they would need to draft Bronny. It was James who said, my son performs better than a lot of these players in the league right now. So if it wasn't for James, so had Stephen A. said what he said, without James first having a provocation of mentioning his son, then James would have been perhaps correct in his diatribe against Stephen A. But that was not the case. He himself opened that can of worms, which then, in my opinion, opened up the openness and opportunity for other people to convey their opinions subsequently to what James has said and done. And it doesn't help that LeBron won't meet with Stephen A. in a much more calmer situation. As Stephen A. said, and this is another reason I respect Stephen A. too, because he doesn't run from anybody. If you have a problem with him or he has a problem with you, he has no problem having you on his platform or going on your platform to have a discussion with you. So because Stephen A. has that going for him, it wasn't hard to call LeBron's bluff. The fact that LeBron won't go speak to Stephen A. directly, but he'll go on a sibling department, a similar show, a sibling show on ESPN, instead of going on First Take or his platform to speak with him directly, it conveys a certain level of disingenuousness. Gotta call out how I see it. So LeBron looks fake for not taking his issue directly to Stephen A. Subsequently, the game. The manner in which he did it at the game was disingenuous because of the fact that Stephen A. couldn't really retort it due to the variables. And plus, it was just recently in lieu of his renewal with ESPN. And then to Stephen A.'s point, and then upon a further review of that incident, you can see LeBron James visibly glaring at the camera that shot that angle behind Stephen A.'s back. So I have reason to believe that LeBron James is also someone that's not genuine in the regard of having integral conversations, letting the truth abound. And to kind of make this all a full circle, this is also something that I accuse both the right and the left from a political sense of doing. Now, in my personal opinion, I believe the left is much more potent in shutting down objective, centralized conversation. And the reason I connect that with LeBron as well, because he himself is also a Democrat. He votes for left-leaning pundits. I mean, you know what they say, you are who you associate yourself with. So if I'm hanging out with a bunch of people that aren't about objective discussion, that's all about being an echo chamber and all about just reiterating their own thoughts and feelings with no willingness to hear other people's perspective, eventually I'm going to be that way too. You capitulate to the abundance of whatever that environment entails. But that's all I have to say. I just wanted to get on here because I can absolutely relate to Stephen A. I too have been subjected to being ostracized just for simply being neutral. Not unequivocally aligning with one side, but just being objective enough to listen to all sides was enough to be ostracized. I've lost friends, family. Well, mostly friends, but I've had family look at me differently in lieu of not being in alignment with the stereotypically pro-black party. I'll let y'all do the research why I don't think the Democratic Party isn't the most pro-black. You can say the same about Republicans too, But I said if one was to have some sort of firearm towards their head, which one of the two would be closer to being pro-black? It were me, I would say the Republican Party. But that's just me. But I hope this commentary is refreshing, and definitely to hear all of your thoughts. Have a good day.